There is a man I wish to describe to you. He is not miserable, not precisely. He wakes each morning at the same hour he has awakened for the last decade. He travels the same road to the same occupation. He earns enough to settle his obligations, enough to keep hardship at a distance, enough to consider himself secure. And each evening he returns to his chair beside the fire, folds his hands, and reassures himself that he is a practical man, that he has avoided reckless risks, that he has never made a spectacle of himself, that he has been careful. And he is correct. He has been careful. He has been so careful, in fact, that he has spent his entire life retreating from it, from the life that could have been lived, from the fortune that could have been claimed, from the man he might have become. That man is not your enemy. That man is you. If you fail to understand what I'm about to tell you, comfort is not security. Comfort is the most refined disguise poverty has ever worn. Comfort is the most refined disguise poverty has ever worn. And in this lesson, I intend to tear away that disguise, principle by principle, story by story, until the enemy has nowhere left to conceal itself. There are 7 laws. They have shattered the grip of mediocrity in men whose names are remembered, and in men whose names were never known because they acted too late. I intend for you to act before it is too late. Let us begin. Part 1. Comfort is poverty wearing a mask. I want to speak to you about a man I studied for nearly 20 years. Not one specific man, but a type of man. A pattern so widespread, so consistent across every city, profession, and household I examined that I eventually regarded him as a single figure, a living example of figure, a living example of what happens when the greatest enemy of achievement is allowed to take hold without ever being identified. Outwardly, he did not appear to be a failure. He had employment, he had shelter, he had people who relied upon him and whom in his own way he supported. He was courteous, he was not a criminal, he did not collapse in the gutter, he paid his debts eventually, he mostly kept his promises, and he generally fulfilled his responsibilities. But something was absent within him. And what was absent was not money, though money was scarce. What was absent was direction. What was absent was purpose. What was absent was the quality I came to call definiteness, a fixed, burning, immovable objective toward which every hour of every day is consciously directed. This man possessed no such objective. He had desires, he had grievances, he had opinions about the people succeeding around him, and explanations for why their success came from advantages he himself had never been given. But he had no aim. And because he had no aim, he drifted. And because he drifted, had no aim, he drifted. And because he drifted, nature, that great impartial force governing the affairs of men with the same cold accuracy by which it governs the stars, carried him wherever it chose, not where he desired to go. I have a name for what happened to this man. I learned it not from books, but from years spent examining the forces that shape human destiny. The name is hypnotic rhythm. Let me explain what I mean, because this is the most important principle I will speak of in this entire lesson. And if you fail to understand it, everything that follows will be nothing more than words. Nature maintains perfect balance throughout the universe. The stars move in exact order. The seasons arrive and depart without failure. The acorn becomes the oak, never the pine. The pine seed produces the pine, never the elm. This is not coincidence. It is the operation of a law so immense and so complete that the human mind can scarcely comprehend it in full. That same law, the law through which nature fixes all things into their proper condition and sustains them there, also governs the minds and habits of men with equal precision. Any thought repeated often enough, any action performed consistently enough, any environment accepted long enough, eventually reaches the point where nature assumes control and makes it permanent. Think of a musician learning a melody. At first, every note must be searched for deliberately. There is strain, there is concentration, there is difficulty. But the melody is repeated again and again and again until eventually something changes. The melody begins to play itself. The fingers move before the conscious mind issues the command. That is rhythm. And when a habit of thought reaches that condition, it cannot be broken by wishing. It cannot be broken by mere resolution. It can only be broken by the same force that created it, repetition, deliberate, sustained, and directed toward a new aim. Now apply this to the comfortable man. He has been comfortable for 1 year, then 5 years, then 10. With every passing season, his habit of ease, his acceptance of whatever life presents, his willingness to drift wherever circumstances carry him has been reinforced, repeated, deepened, until nature itself has seized hold of it and fixed it permanently. And now he is no longer merely comfortable. He is imprisoned. He is like a man caught in a whirlpool who imagines he is swimming freely, never realizing that every movement draws him deeper toward the center. I first encountered this principle expressed in its most chilling form from a source I never expected. In a manuscript I prepared years ago, one I withheld from the public because I feared the world was not ready for its contents. I recorded a conversation in which this law was described with such startling clarity that it stopped my pen in my hand. The voice I recorded said this: I cause people to drift from school into the first job available to them without any definite purpose beyond earning a living. Through this trick, I keep millions trapped in fear of poverty their entire lives. Read those words again. Not misfortune, not inherited poverty, not economic cruelty. A trick. A trick so simple that the man ensnared by it never suspects he has been trapped because from the inside it appears reasonable. It appears prudent. It appears stable. But it is a prison. Now I ask you a question. But it is a prison. Now I ask you a question, and I ask you to answer it honestly, not to me, but to yourself. Examine your own life. Examine how you have spent your hours during the past month. Ask yourself how many of those hours were directed by a definite purpose you consciously chose for yourself, and how many were directed by whatever happened to appeal, by the demands of others, by old habits, by the path requiring the least resistance. Do not answer too quickly. The comfortable man always answers quickly because the quick answer is usually the comfortable one. In Think and Grow Rich, I identified 6 symptoms through which the fear of poverty reveals itself in a man's life. I want to name them here, not as a doctor naming an illness in a lecture, but as a mirror held before a man who has not examined himself honestly for a very long time. The first symptom is indifference, not despair. Indifference. The willingness to accept whatever compensation life offers without resistance. The acceptance of small wages, small opportunities, small ambitions, because demanding something greater appears more difficult than settling for less. Indifference is the philosophy of the comfortable man, and it is poverty disguised as contentment. The second symptom is indecision, the habit of allowing others to think on your behalf, remaining, as I once described it, on the fence, never fully committing to any course because commitment introduces the possibility of failure, and failure introduces the possibility of shame. The indecisive man believes he is being cautious. In reality, he is being afraid. And while he hesitates, time moves forward without him. The third symptom is doubt, usually expressed through excuses and alibis designed to explain away failure. The man who doubts himself eventually begins envying those who do not, and envy without action eventually hardens into resentment. Doubt is the comfortable man's explanation for why the life he desired was unavailable to him, when the truth is that the opportunity existed and he doubted his own right to pursue it. The fourth symptom is worry, expressed through constant fault-finding, reckless spending, nervous restlessness, and endless mental agitation that produces nothing of substance. Worry creates the illusion of movement while replacing meaningful action. It allows a man to feel occupied without requiring him to confront the discomfort of decisive effort. The fifth symptom is overcaution. And this, perhaps more than any other, is the symptom most easily mistaken for wisdom. The overcautious man is rarely idle. He studies endlessly. He analyzes every possible risk, every avenue of failure, every danger attached to movement or ambition. He calls this preparation. But preparation without action eventually becomes paralysis. He waits for certainty, and certainty never arrives. Years pass while he remains where he began, armed with endless knowledge of why things might fail, and possessing no experience of what success requires. The sixth symptom is procrastination, the habit of postponing until tomorrow what should have been done yesterday, and postponing again the following day until delay itself becomes a permanent condition of life. Every promise broken to oneself weakens self-confidence a little further. Every delay teaches the subconscious mind that action is optional and retreat is acceptable. These 6 symptoms are not separate weaknesses. They are 6 expressions of one central force, the fear of poverty. And the fear of poverty is rarely a fear of starvation or cold. More often it is the fear of exertion, the fear of demanding more from life than one has been handed without resistance. It is the fear of stretching beyond the boundaries of what feels safe and familiar. The man who has allowed these habits to take root through years of drifting is not evil. He is not unintelligent. He is simply a man who permitted repeated patterns of thought to harden into permanent rhythms until the rhythm itself became a prison. There can be no compromise between riches and poverty because the roads leading toward them move in opposite directions. A man cannot remain motionless between them. The individual who believes he is standing still is already drifting backward because backward movement requires no effort at all. Study yourself carefully. Study your routines. Identify the symptoms wherever they appear. Give them names because no enemy can be defeated while remaining unidentified. Part 2. The most dangerous illusion ever accepted by man. I want you to imagine a young man leaving school with intelligence, energy, and potential. He has ability enough to impress his teachers. He has ambition enough to dream occasionally of doing something extraordinary. And yet he leaves without one thing that matters more than intelligence, more than talent, more than favorable circumstances: definite purpose. At first, this appears harmless. After all, he tells himself there is time. Life is long. Opportunities will reveal themselves eventually, so he accepts the first opportunity that arrives, not because it aligns with a carefully chosen vision, but because it is available. It pays enough. It appears respectable. He convinces himself it is temporary, but temporary conditions possess a strange tendency to become permanent when no greater aim exists to replace them. 5 years pass, then 10. The temporary occupation becomes an identity. The stepping stone becomes the destination. The dream remains alive only in imagination, pushed further into the distance each year, like the horizon retreating before a traveler who never changes direction. He becomes comfortable. He acquires obligations. Responsibilities accumulate around him, and now the risks he once considered temporary sacrifices begin to appear irresponsible. The future he once imagined becomes something he speaks of nostalgically rather than something he intends to build. Gradually, he develops explanations. Perhaps the timing was wrong. Perhaps others possessed advantages he lacked. Perhaps extraordinary success belongs only to extraordinary people. He repeats these explanations often enough that they cease sounding like excuses and begin sounding like truth. This pattern appeared so consistently throughout my studies of human achievement that I ceased viewing it as coincidence. It was law. The law of hypnotic rhythm operating exactly as nature intended. In that same unpublished manuscript I mentioned earlier, the mechanism was described with unsettling precision. The voice said, "I cause people to spend freely and save little or nothing until fear of poverty gains control over them. I cause them to drift I cause them to drift into unpleasant environments in their homes, their occupations, and relationships, and to remain there through the force of habit." Notice those words carefully. Remain there, not chained there, not forced there. Remaining there because inertia is among the strongest forces affecting human behavior. A man who does not consciously choose departure will almost always remain where he is while the years quietly accumulate around him. But here's the most important truth about drifting. The drifter is not ultimately controlled by his circumstances. He is controlled by his thoughts. His external conditions merely reflect the internal patterns he has accepted repeatedly enough for nature to make permanent. And here the law becomes both prison and key, because hypnotic rhythm strengthens good habits exactly as readily as destructive ones. It reinforces thoughts of abundance just as faithfully as thoughts of limitation. It does not judge. It does not choose favorites. It operates with the same impartiality as gravity. A man who understands gravity may build bridges instead of fearing falls. In exactly the same way, a man who understands hypnotic rhythm may consciously may consciously construct the life he desires instead of unconsciously drifting into the life he fears. The non-drifter is not a different species of human being. He is not born with secret advantages unavailable to others. In that manuscript, I once asked whether the non-drifter possessed some unique mental power denied to ordinary men. The answer was immediate: no. The only difference is that the non-drifter uses his own mind deliberately. That is the distinction in its entirety. The drifter allows employers, neighbors, fears, social expectations, and old habits to think on his behalf. The non-drifter reclaims authority over his own mind. He selects a definite purpose. He organizes his time around it. He chooses his environment deliberately, because he understands that repeated exposure eventually becomes permanent mental condition. Observe the non-drifter carefully, and you will see unmistakable characteristics. He is always engaged in some definite pursuit, directed by a definite plan. He possesses a major objective and smaller objectives aligned beneath it. His speech carries clarity. His movements carry urgency. His decisions carry firmness because he knows what he wants and has accepted the cost required to obtain it. When asked a question, he answers directly. He does not hide behind endless hesitation disguised as careful thinking. He decides, and then he acts. The drifter accepts whatever life happens to offer. The non-drifter negotiates with life on his own terms. And now the question becomes unavoidable. Which description resembles you more closely? If you recognize yourself in the drifter, then understand this clearly. The habit can still be broken, but it must be broken before nature fixes it permanently through rhythm. And there exists only one force powerful enough to interrupt the drift: a burning desire. Not a mild preference, not a passing wish. A burning desire so intense that comfort itself becomes unbearable. A desire so powerful that drifting no longer feels peaceful but intolerable. The current may still exist. The resistance may still be difficult, but the man possessed by genuine desire can no longer imagine surrendering to it. And it is precisely that kind of desire that separates the man who dreams from the man who transforms his life completely. Part 3. The decision that separates ordinary men from extraordinary ones. I want to tell you about a man who arrived in a city carrying almost nothing the world would recognize as valuable. He possessed no fortune, no influential family name, no academic distinction, no recommendation from powerful men. By every outward measure, he appeared entirely unremarkable, yet within his mind he carried something more powerful than capital. He carried certainty, not hope, not vague ambition, certainty. He had fixed upon a single purpose with such intensity that the purpose had ceased to feel like a possibility and had become, in his own understanding, an inevitability awaiting only its appointed time. The man was Edwin C. Barnes, and the purpose that consumed him was simple. He intended to become the business associate of Thomas Edison. Notice carefully what I did not say. He did not wish to meet Edison. He did not hope to work for Edison. He did not aspire vaguely to success in the inventor's industry. His desire was precise. He intended partnership. The people around him reacted exactly as most people react when confronted by a desire larger than the circumstances surrounding it. They offered caution disguised as wisdom. They advised realism. They explained limitations. They spoke to him from the narrow boundaries of their own accepted lives. But Barnes possessed a quality uncommon among men. He listened without surrendering. When the day finally came for him to travel to Orange, New Jersey, he lacked even the money required for proper transportation. So he traveled by freight train rather than remain where he was. There is a lesson hidden inside that detail which most men overlook. The ordinary man waits for conditions to become favorable before moving. The extraordinary man moves first and forces conditions to adjust around his decision. Barnes arrived looking more like a wanderer than a future business partner. Yet when he announced himself, he spoke not with hesitation, but with conviction. He stated his purpose as though he were describing a fact already decided. Edison did not immediately offer him partnership. He offered him the lowest position available. Another man might have interpreted this as rejection. Barnes interpreted it as entry. That distinction changed his entire life. Because Barnes understood something the comfortable man never understands. Proximity matters. Environment matters. Daily exposure matters. A man who remains close to opportunity long enough while preparing himself relentlessly will eventually encounter a moment for which unprepared men are invisible. 5 years passed. 5 years without promotion. 5 years without guarantees. 5 years during which nearly everyone around him saw him as ordinary. But Barnes never accepted the identity others assigned to him because internally he had already decided who he was becoming. And when opportunity finally appeared disguised as a difficult problem nobody else wanted to solve, Barnes recognized it instantly. He seized it. And within a short time, he became exactly what he had declared himself to be years earlier, Edison's business associate. Study this carefully because the principle beneath the story matters more than the story itself. Barnes did not succeed because fortune favored him. He succeeded because his desire became so definite, so emotionally charged, so persistent, that it reorganized his behavior completely. His thoughts, his actions, his endurance, his interpretation of setbacks, all aligned around one central objective. That is what a burning desire does. It disciplines the mind. Most men never reach this state because their desires remain weak enough to negotiate with comfort. The moment difficulty appears, they retreat into explanations. They reinterpret surrender as practicality. They call compromise maturity. But genuine desire does not negotiate with obstacles. It reorganizes itself around overcoming them. There is an ancient military story I have repeated often because it illustrates this principle perfectly. A commander landed his soldiers on enemy shores. His men were outnumbered. Retreat remained possible. And because retreat remained possible, hesitation remained possible as well. So before the battle began, the commander ordered every ship burned. His soldiers watched the flames consume their only path backward. At that moment, something changed psychologically. The decision had already been made for them. Victory was no longer one option among many. It became the only acceptable outcome. Men fight differently when retreat disappears. Understand this clearly. Most people never fully commit to anything because they preserve hidden escape routes inside their minds. They pursue goals while secretly preparing explanations for failure. They advance cautiously because part of them intends to retreat if discomfort becomes too severe. But the individual who burns the ships transforms desire into necessity. And necessity awakens powers that comfort keeps asleep. Now, desire alone is not enough. Desire without direction becomes frustration. So once a definite purpose has been chosen, it must immediately be connected to disciplined action. There are 6 practical steps through which desire becomes physical achievement. The first step is absolute clarity of objective. The mind cannot organize itself effectively around vague wishes. I want success means nothing. Success must be defined specifically, clearly, measurably. Barnes did not say, I want a better future. He said, I will become Edison's associate. Precision gives power to thought. The second step is determining what you will give in return. Every achievement carries a price. Time, effort, discipline, sacrifice, criticism, uncertainty, all must be paid willingly. The man seeking reward without price seeks fantasy, not success. The third step is establishing a definite deadline. A dream without a date remains an abstraction. Time pressure forces thought into motion. It converts intention into urgency. The fourth step is immediate action. Not perfect preparation. Not endless research, immediate movement. Most men destroy their ambitions while waiting to feel completely ready. But readiness is rarely achieved before action begins. Confidence grows through movement, not before it. The fifth step is writing the objective clearly. Writing transforms desire from an emotional cloud into a structured commitment. A written goal acquires weight. It becomes something external, visible, undeniable. The sixth step is repetition. Read the statement aloud every morning and every night with emotion and conviction. Not mechanically. Emotion is what impresses instructions upon the subconscious mind. Many people dismiss this practice because they misunderstand how the mind operates. The subconscious accepts repeated emotionally charged thoughts as instructions. It then begins quietly organizing perception, behavior, and decision-making around those instructions. This process functions whether the dominant thoughts are empowering or destructive. A man who repeatedly tells himself he is trapped eventually behaves like a trapped man. A man who repeatedly reinforces a definite vision of achievement gradually begins behaving in alignment with that vision. The law is impartial. That is why two men may stand inside identical circumstances while moving toward entirely different destinies. One reinforces limitation daily, the other reinforces possibility. And over time, thought crystallizes into reality. I once studied merchants after the Great Chicago Fire reduced entire districts to ash. Many gathered together and concluded the city was finished. They decided to leave and rebuild somewhere easier. Only one man refused. Standing before the ruins of his destroyed business, Marshall Field declared that on that exact spot he would build the greatest store in the world, regardless of how many times it burned again. That statement was not optimism, it was decision. The comfortable response would have been retreat, safety, relocation. But remarkable achievements are never built by men who abandon difficult ground the moment discomfort appears. Marshall Field stayed. He rebuilt. And the force that sustained him was not luck. It was definiteness of purpose reinforced daily until temporary devastation became irrelevant beside permanent vision. This is the dividing line between ordinary existence and extraordinary achievement. The ordinary man asks whether conditions are favorable. The extraordinary man asks whether the objective is worth demanding from life, regardless of conditions. One waits. The other decides. Part 4. The invisible enemies that sabotage ambition before it begins. I want you to consider a man standing alone in his room late at night with an opportunity in front of him. The opportunity is real. The plan is practical. The resources required are difficult but obtainable. And for a brief moment, he feels something rare and powerful, the sensation that his life might genuinely change if he acts. Then another voice enters his mind. It does not shout. Fear rarely shouts. It speaks quietly, reasonably, almost intelligently. What if this fails? What will people think? What if you leave security behind and cannot recover it? What if you are not as capable as you believe? And because the voice sounds cautious rather than cowardly, he listens. Days pass. Then weeks. The emotional intensity fades. The urgency dissolves. Eventually, the opportunity disappears entirely, not because it was impossible, but because hesitation consumed the narrow window in which action would have mattered. This is how most ambitions die. Not dramatically, quietly, respectably, hidden beneath explanations that sound rational enough to protect a man from admitting he was afraid. During my years studying successful and unsuccessful people alike, I discovered that nearly every form of self-sabotage could be traced back to 6 fundamental fears. I called them the 6 ghosts because they possess no physical substance, yet they govern the lives of millions with greater authority than any visible enemy. They are the fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of losing love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. These fears operate invisibly. They influence decisions before the conscious mind fully recognizes their presence. And because most men never examine them honestly, they mistake emotional paralysis for careful thinking. The fear of poverty is the strongest because it strikes directly at survival and identity. A man afraid of poverty does not merely fear lacking money. He fears humiliation, dependence, loss of status. He fears becoming insignificant in the eyes of others. That fear quietly shapes behavior. It persuades men to remain in occupations they despise because predictable dissatisfaction feels safer than uncertain possibility. It persuades them to lower ambitions until ambition itself disappears. It convinces them that settling is maturity and that surrender is realism. And because the fear operates gradually, many never notice how completely it has arranged their lives. The fear of criticism is equally destructive because human beings possess a deep instinct for social acceptance. Most people would rather remain miserable inside your approval than risk temporary ridicule while pursuing meaningful. Observe how often talent disappears beneath this fear. The artist who never shares his work, the entrepreneur who never launches the business, the speaker who remains silent, the thinker who hides unconventional ideas to avoid disapproval. Entire lives become negotiations with other people's opinions. And here is the tragedy. The crowd whose approval men fear so desperately is usually too occupied with its own insecurities to think about them for long at all. Fear magnifies imaginary judgment until imagined embarrassment appears more dangerous than permanent regret. The fear of ill health often creates the very weakness it obsesses over. A mind dominated by anxiety gradually weakens the body attempts to protect. Thoughts repeated long enough influence posture, energy, appetite, sleep, and emotional stability. The body listens constantly to the mind's instructions. The fear of losing love drives people into emotional dependence. Instead of building strength, purpose, and self-respect, they attempt to secure affection through control, jealousy, sacrifice of identity, or endless reassurance. And in trying desperately not to lose love, they often destroy the very qualities that make love possible. The fear of old age persuades people to surrender before life has asked them to. They begin speaking as though opportunity belongs only to the young. They retreat mentally years before they decline physically. They accept limitation not because nature demanded it, but because society suggested it repeatedly until they believed it. And finally, there is the fear of death, the oldest fear of all. Yet strangely, the fear of death rarely destroys life as effectively as the fear of living incompletely. Many people die gradually over decades while technically remaining alive. They abandon risk, curiosity, ambition, imagination, and growth long before the body itself fails. Now, understand this clearly. These fears are not inherited permanently. They are conditioned through repetition. A child is not born fearing criticism. He learns it. He experiences embarrassment, rejection, comparison, ridicule, and gradually the mind begins associating visibility with danger. Thought repeated emotionally enough becomes belief. Belief repeated behaviorally enough becomes identity. And identity repeated long enough becomes destiny. This is why the subconscious mind must be guarded carefully. It accepts repeated impressions with extraordinary obedience. Whatever dominates attention consistently eventually influences behavior automatically. A man who constantly rehearses failure mentally begins unconsciously preparing for it physically. He hesitates more. He notices obstacles more quickly than opportunities. He interprets temporary setbacks as confirmation of permanent inadequacy. He withdraws effort before effort has fully expressed its power. Then he calls the result fate. But fate is often nothing more than repeated thought hardened into behavior. The same law works in reverse. A man who repeatedly feeds mind thoughts of confidence, purpose, resilience, and determination gradually conditions himself toward those states. His posture changes. His decisions sharpen. His tolerance for discomfort expands. His perception of possibility increases. The world itself may not change immediately, but his interaction with it changes dramatically. And because action changes, results eventually follow. This is why self-examination is so important. Most people attempt to change external conditions without identifying the internal patterns, recreating those conditions repeatedly. Look honestly at your life. Where have you accepted less than you truly desired because fear disguised itself as practicality? Where have you remained silent because criticism appeared unbearable? Where have you delayed action while pretending preparation was necessary? Where have you tolerated dissatisfaction because uncertainty frightened you more than unhappiness? The answers to those questions reveal the ghosts currently governing your decisions. And once identified, they lose much of their power. Fear thrives in vagueness. It weakens under direct examination. The moment a man says honestly, I have been postponing this decision because I fear criticism, or I remain here because I fear uncertainty, the fear stops operating invisibly. It becomes visible, definable, confrontable. Most people never reach this level of honesty with themselves. They prefer explanations preserving comfort over truths demanding transformation. But every individual who has escaped mediocrity began with one painful realization. The prison was never entirely external. The prison existed first in the mind. And the moment a man recognizes that fact completely, the possibility of freedom begins. Part 5. The habit that quietly separates leaders from followers. I want to direct your attention now toward a principle so simple that most people overlook it entirely, and yet so powerful that fortunes, reputations, industries, and entire lives have been built upon it. It is the habit of giving more than is expected, not occasionally, not when convenient, habitually. Years ago, I observed two men employed in the same organization. They possessed similar intelligence, similar education, similar opportunity. Both received the same instructions, worked under the same conditions, and were compensated at nearly identical rates. Yet within a decade, one man had risen into leadership while the other remained exactly where he began. The difference was not talent. The difference was attitude expressed through action. The first man developed the habit of rendering service beyond what was required. If a task demanded one effort, he gave two. If responsibility appeared unattended, the second man performed precisely what was necessary to preserve his position and nothing more. He considered this fairness. After all, he reasoned, why should a man give additional effort without guaranteed reward? At first glance, the argument sounds reasonable, but life does not reward reason alone. Life rewards value, and value is almost always measured beyond minimum obligation. The individual who does only what he is paid to do creates a closed equation. Nothing unexpected enters his life because he contributes. And who consistently contributes more than expected creates imbalance, and nature itself tends to reward productive imbalance through the law of returns. This law operates everywhere. A farmer plants one seed and receives many in return. An investment compounded over time multiplies beyond the original contribution. One act of excellent service repeated consistently creates opportunities impossible to predict at the beginning. The world responds disproportionately to sustained excellence because sustained excellence remains rare. Most people seek reward first and contribution second. The exceptional individual reverses the order. Andrew Carnegie emphasized this principle repeatedly because he understood something the average employee never grasps. The habit of exceeding expectation transforms not only external opportunity but internal identity. A man repeatedly performing beyond ordinary standards eventually stops thinking of himself as ordinary, and the subconscious mind organizes behavior around identity. This is why the habit matters so profoundly. It is not merely about impressing employers or increasing income. It is about conditioning. The comfortable man avoids the extra mile because the extra mile contains discomfort. It demands energy after convenience has already been satisfied. It demands initiative where passivity would suffice. It demands effort without immediate guarantee. But that is precisely why the rewards located there remain so valuable. Crowds gather around minimum effort. Very few gather around extraordinary contribution. There exists an old observation I have always found accurate. The extra mile is never crowded. Study successful individuals carefully and you will notice a pattern. They often began receiving small opportunities before larger ones arrived. Why? Because reliability under ordinary circumstances creates trust for extraordinary responsibility. A man trusted with small tasks eventually receives larger ones. A man who cannot be trusted beyond minimum obligation rarely advances beyond minimum reward. Now let us examine the principle more practically. Every service is performed. Carelessness signals weakness of character because careless work reflects careless thinking. Excellence, on the other hand, strengthens discipline. A man striving constantly to improve performance sharpens himself through the process. The quantity of service refers to willingness. The willingness to contribute beyond strict necessity. The willingness to continue after others stop. The willingness to become useful wherever usefulness is needed. And then there is spirit, perhaps the most overlooked dimension of all. Men may perform identical tasks while creating entirely decks on those around them. One complains constantly, resents responsibility, radiates irritation, poisons environments through attitude. The other brings energy, cooperation, composure, and enthusiasm. Difficulty. People instinctively gravitate toward the second man, not because human beings are sentimental, but because cooperative energy multiplies effectiveness. The individual who combines quality, quantity, and spirit becomes difficult to ignore. Marshall Field, when building his great store in Chicago, he realized customers did not merely purchase products, they purchased experiences, respect, attention, reliability, trust. That understanding transformed ordinary transactions, lasting reputation, and reputation compounded across becomes power. Most individuals underestimate how profoundly small, repeated behaviors shape destiny. A man arrives late repeatedly. He believes the lateness insignificant, but repetition converts small behavior into established identity. Another man fulfills promises consistently, handles details carefully, treats people respectfully, and contributes beyond expectation. He may not notice immediate rewards either, but repetition again shapes identity. Eventually, opportunity begins choosing between these two men differently, because opportunity itself follows patterns of trust. Now, I must caution you about something important. Going the extra mile does not mean allowing yourself to become exploited blindly. It does not mean surrendering self-respect or remaining indefinitely in environments destroying your growth. The principle operates properly only when connected to definite purpose. A man with purpose uses extra effort strategically. He understands every disciplined action strengthens his character, expands his capacity, and prepares for greater responsibility later. Even temporary positions, because should I do more when I receive no immediate reward? Ambitious man asks, what kind of person am I becoming through repeated actions? That question changes everything. Because destiny is rarely determined by one dramatic moment. More often, it is shaped quietly through repeated daily behavior, so ordinary that most people fail to notice its significance until years have passed. One extra effort, one additional hour, one uncomfortable conversation, one disciplined decision repeated consistently enough to become habit. And habit, once strengthened by time, becomes character. Character eventually becomes fate. This is why the law of increasing returns extends beyond money or career. It applies equally to relationships. Every repeated investment compounds. Every repeat compounds also. The man who improves each day eventually separates himself enormously from the man who postpones improvement until circumstances feel. And circumstances rarely become for those waiting passively. At some point, every individual will decide whether comfort or growth will become the governing principle of. Because growth demands friction, it demands temporary inconvenience, it demands sustained effort after motivation fades. But the alternative is far more costly. The alternative is gradual stagnation disguised as stability. And stagnation, maintained long enough, hardens into permanent limitation. That is why the extra mile matters so profoundly. Not because it is easy, but because it quietly transforms the Part 6. The power that determines whether a man rises or remains where he began. There comes a moment in every ambitious life when information is no longer the missing ingredient. The books have been read, the plans have been considered, the possibilities have been examined from every angle, and yet nothing changes. Why? Because knowledge alone does not transform a life. Decision does. Most people mistake interest for commitment. They become fascinated by improvement without ever fully surrendering themselves to it. They collect ideas the way some men collect tools, piling them carefully in the corner while never building anything substantial with them. But a decision possesses a quality that mere interest never achieves. A real decision closes alternatives. The word itself comes from a root meaning to cut away. And that is precisely what decisive people do. They cut away hesitation. They cut away endless reconsideration. They cut away the emotional luxury of retreat. Indecision drains more human potential than lack of intelligence ever could. I once studied a man who spent nearly 15 years discussing the business he intended to build. His ideas were intelligent, his market analysis was thorough, his understanding of the industry was impressive. Whenever you spoke with him, he sounded like a man standing on the edge of remarkable success, but he never fully committed. 1 year he waited for economic conditions to improve. Another year he waited for additional savings. Then he delayed because competition appeared too strong. Then because the timing no longer seemed ideal. Meanwhile, another man with less knowledge but greater decisiveness entered the same industry and built the very enterprise the first man had imagined for years. The difference was not capability. The difference was action sustained after decision. The comfortable mind always seeks one more guarantee before moving, but life rarely provides guarantees in advance. It responds to movement, not hesitation. This is why leaders tend to decide quickly and change decisions slowly, while followers decide slowly and change decisions quickly. The leader understands that no path reveals itself completely beforehand. Clarity emerges through committed action. The follower waits for certainty and remains trapped in analysis until opportunity passes entirely. There is a dangerous illusion attached to indecision. It creates the feeling of safety. A man postponing commitment believes he is protecting himself from failure. In reality, he is surrendering time, momentum, confidence, and opportunity simultaneously. And time lost through hesitation can never be recovered completely. Billy Sunday once said that indecision is the devil's favorite tool. I believe he understood human nature with remarkable precision, because indecision allows a man to preserve comforting fantasies indefinitely. He may continue imagining a better future without confronting the painful demands required to build it. As long as he never fully decides, he never fully risks disappointment, but he also never fully lives. Now, there exists a mechanism through which decisive thought becomes internal power. I have spoken of it before, but here it must be understood more deeply. That mechanism is autosuggestion. The subconscious mind functions continuously, whether directed consciously or not. It absorbs repeated thoughts, emotional patterns, environmental influences, fears, ambitions, assumptions, and instructions. Then it gradually organizes behavior around whatever material it receives most consistently. Most people allow this process to happen accidentally. They expose themselves daily to fear, negativity, distraction, criticism, limitation, and doubt, while wondering why confidence and clarity remain absent from their lives. The subconscious accepts repetition as authority. Whatever enters repeatedly eventually feels natural. This is why a man raised around pessimism often mistakes pessimism for intelligence. It feels familiar. Familiarity creates emotional acceptance even when the belief itself is destructive. Autosuggestion is the deliberate reversal of this process. It is the conscious act of feeding the mind selected instructions repeatedly until the subconscious begins treating them as reality. Understand this carefully. The subconscious mind cannot easily distinguish between an intensely imagined condition and a physically experienced one. Emotion strengthens impression. Repetition deepens it. Eventually, behavior adjusts around it. A man repeatedly declaring weakness conditions weakness deeper into his identity. A man repeatedly reinforcing purpose, confidence, discipline, and determination gradually conditions. That is why vague positive thinking accomplishes little. Words without emotional conviction rarely penetrate deeply enough to alter behavior. But emotionally charged repetition delivered consistently over time reshapes mental habits powerfully. This is not mystical. It is psychological law. I developed what I called a self-confidence formula because I observed repeatedly that successful individuals conditioned their minds deliberately, while unsuccessful individuals surrendered theirs accidentally to circumstance. The process begins with definiteness. Write clearly what you intend to become, achieve, create, or obtain. Specificity matters because the subconscious responds more strongly to clear direction than to emotional fog. Then define what you are willing to give in exchange. Discipline, study, persistence, sacrifice, time. Every meaningful achievement requires payment. Next, reinforce belief daily through spoken repetition. Read your statement aloud every morning. And every evening with intensity. Speak as though addressing not the air, but the deepest portion of your own mind, because that is precisely what you are doing. At first, this may feel unnatural. Most transformative practices do. The comfortable mind resists deliberate conditioning because deliberate conditioning threatens existing identity. Yet persistence gradually weakens resistance. Thoughts repeated consistently begin influencing posture, emotional state, decision-making, and perception. Opportunities once ignored become visible. Difficulties once overwhelming become manageable. Action once delayed becomes increasingly natural. This process explains why some men persist through obstacles that cause others to surrender immediately. Their internal conditioning differs. One man interprets temporary defeat as evidence of permanent inadequacy. Another interprets the same defeat as information requiring adjustment. The event is identical. The interpretation changes everything, and interpretation itself is shaped largely through mental conditioning. More than 500 highly successful individuals told me some version of the same truth. Their greatest breakthroughs often arrived immediately after periods when surrender appeared most reasonable. Why? Because persistence reorganizes circumstances over time. Most competition disappears not because rivals lack talent, but because they stop too early. Temporary defeat frightens the comfortable man because comfort trained him to avoid prolonged discomfort. But the ambitious individual gradually develops tolerance for uncertainty, rejection, delay, criticism, and failure, because repeated exposure strengthens psychological endurance. This endurance becomes an enormous advantage. The world often appears to reward brilliance when in reality it rewards effort longer than average. A moderately talented individual with relentless persistence frequently surpasses highly gifted individuals governed by inconsistency. Now understand this final point clearly. Decision must eventually become identity. A man saying, "I am trying to become disciplined," thinks differently from a man saying, "I am disciplined." A man saying, "I hope to succeed," thinks differently from one saying, "I build success through my daily actions." Identity directs behavior more powerfully than temporary motivation, and identity itself is constructed gradually through repeated thought and repeated action operating together. This is why burning the ships matters psychologically. The moment retreat disappears, identity changes. The individual no longer negotiates constantly with alternatives. Energy previously consumed by hesitation becomes available for execution. The man who decides completely acquires a certain forcefulness, difficult to describe but impossible to miss. His speech sharpens, his actions accelerate, his excuses diminish, his attention organizes itself naturally around progress. And while others remain trapped discussing possibilities endlessly, he begins accumulating results. Not because he possesses magical advantages, but because decisive commitment activates capacities, comfort keeps dormant. The comfortable life asks for very little, and because it asks for little, it produces little. But the life built through decision, persistence, disciplined thought, and repeated action gradually transforms the individual capable of sustaining it. That transformation is the real reward. Everything else follows afterward.